I'm Lynn Robert, CEO of the Island Coastal Economic Trust, or better known by most of you as ICE-T. At ICE-T, our team has the pleasure of living, working, and playing in the territories of the Coast Salish, the Nuu-chah-nulth, and the Kwakwaka'wakw peoples. For those of you who don't know about ICE-T, we're an economic development trust dedicated to supporting economic diversification on Vancouver Island and the Sunshine Coast through a range of programs and services. Over the years, we've had the pleasure of working with the communities who you'll be hearing from today. So, like you, I'm very excited to hear from our speakers, some of whom I've had the opportunity to work with directly, and to hear more about the initiatives underway and the opportunities for the future. So, without further ado, enjoy the session.
Tonchi, hello. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dan Hurley, principal of the Hurley Martin Group and a director with the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance. I'm also a citizen of the Métis Nation of British Columbia. I want to acknowledge with gratitude that VAIA operates on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish, Nuu-chah-nulth, and Kwakwaka'wakw peoples. And I'm speaking to you today from Gabriel Island on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Snuneymuxw peoples. This panel discussion is on the Indigenous Economy, and it is sponsored by Island Coastal Economic Trust. Island First Nations are expanding economic activities in traditional and non-traditional industries. They are becoming leading economic players, driving wealth creation and employment for their members, while contributing to the economic vitality of local communities. Leaders from 3 First Nation development corporations, Hout, Snuneymuxw, and Malahat, are joining us today to share their stories of where they are headed, what's working, and what's needed going forward. Angela Vandenhout is the Director of Economic Development at Malahat Nation. Ian Simpson is CEO of the Petroglyph Development Corporation, and Trevor Cootes is Councilor with Hout First Nation and Chair-elect of the VAIA Board of Directors. Following our presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask a few questions of our speakers. We encourage you to enter your questions in the chat function below, and you can find it at the bottom of your screen. We also encourage you to join us for the roundtable discussion immediately following the session, where you'll be able to have a more in-depth discussion with our presenters. Welcome to all of you. To begin our session, I will ask each of you to briefly introduce yourselves and make some opening remarks, and we will begin with Angela. We will start with you. Over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, everybody. My name is Angela Vandenhout. I am the Director of Economic Development for the Malahat Nation. I've been working for various First Nations for about 15 years in different capacities, and have definitely noticed some themes as they pertain to economic development. Specifically today, I'm going to focus on Indigenous and non-Indigenous partnerships in business, as I think there's some strong takeaways there, and it's also very current in seeing these types of relationships to establish businesses and build capacity in Indigenous communities where it currently doesn't already exist. So I'll start with some of the challenges, and then I'll finish with the successes and how we may move forward in a more collaborative way. Couple main themes for the challenges. Number one is the undervaluation of Indigenous land. So what I've seen as a theme over the last decade is that non-Indigenous partners often don't add value at all or undervalue the land if it sits on reserve. This, of course, shouldn't be the case. Fair market value is always what we look at for land valuation and should be what we look at moving forward. Oftentimes, non-Indigenous partners approach us with MOUs or LOIs that include reference to jobs and lack the pathways that lead to those jobs. So in my experience currently today, for example, job opportunities are not the issue. There are plenty of job opportunities. Those within the nations that I've served who wish to be working are, and who are not working don't want to be working or have other social issues that are limiting their ability to full-time work. So it's not about the jobs per se, but rather a pathway to get there. And one way to do that is through, for example, youth engagement, starting from a really young age to have youth able to envision their own pathways to get from A to B, not today, but just to envision themselves as they grow and mature and learn, what opportunities may be available to them. Not limiting job opportunities or training opportunities or pathways to simple labor jobs only, which is another pattern that I've seen. It's about expanding the opportunities, labor, absolutely, but also labor management, entrepreneurship and ownership of businesses, executive management, if they wish to do so. It's exposure to these types of options that will really build capacity and start creating opportunities as a mindset from a really young age. Another thing that I've seen is that MOUs and LOIs and certainly agreements that follow are often created unilaterally by the non-Indigenous party rather than collaboratively with both groups. In the most extreme case recently, I actually received an email from somebody I had never met who simply sent me a mutual benefits agreement to do business with their non-Indigenous group. I found this approach offensive. I don't believe that this approach would be taken in a non-Indigenous setting, and I have never ever seen that in my life, where somebody contacted me to sign a binding agreement that without even knowing who I was or having met me in person, or even in the digital age for that matter. I had literally never seen this person's name. This is not the approach to take. I appreciate and understand that some groups have the best intentions and that they don't necessarily mean to come off this way, that they may feel that they're, providing some benefit for us not to have to necessarily go into spend thousands of dollars in legal, or that there's an assumption made that we may not have capacity. But that's what it comes down to, is making assumptions before you've built any type of relationship in this Indigenous community or with the actual participants that you're seeking partnership with. So how do we create change in this area? Well, it's about collaboration and customization. So what I mean by that is it's not just working directly with a nation and or its ECDEV, but actually using that approach with every nation that you intend to work with. It's not one size fits all. It's about building genuine relationships, understanding the needs of each community, understanding their capacity, their vision for economic development, and then creating some type of foundation for a partnership that addresses that. Every community is going to be different. It doesn't matter if they're all on Vancouver Island. Every community has unique needs and vision, and that really needs to be adhered to, whether you go to 1 or 50 nations to approach them for a partnership in business. It's about knowledge transfer and an exit strategy. So not binding a nation into a 20-year, 30-year, 50-year, 99-year agreement to work together. It's more about an approach that allows an expert, perhaps in a non-Indigenous environment, to come in and transfer that knowledge and build capacity within the nation to be able to manage its own business in that regard in the future. So having an exit strategy to any agreements is also imperative to empower the nation and build the capacity from within. And then, as I touched on before, the youth-centric approach. So it's one thing to offer jobs to adults, but it's quite another to have those opportunities be presented from a very young age. I recall from when I was a child, we would have assembly and we would have various people from various industries come in. You may not want to be everything that you see, a firefighter, a teacher, but just to understand that those opportunities are there would create a real shift in the entire culture of opportunity within First Nations and Indigenous communities. So really touching on that youth-centric approach when it comes to these methods. All in all, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. It's going to take time. It's an investment in time that non-Indigenous organizations and groups need to really be invested in to be successful in this space. It's not about signing legal papers. It's about building genuine relationships. And from those relationships, you will, as a side effect of that, build trust. It will take time. Take the time. And this is the path that will lead Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups to success, in my recent experience. So Ian, I will hand it over to you to share some of your knowledge in this area.
Thanks, Angela. Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Simpson. I'm a proud member of the Snuneymuxw First Nation, and my traditional name is Simpson. And I'm the CEO of Petroglyph Development Group, which is Snuneymuxw's economic development arm. Today, I just wanted to speak generally on two approaches that you'd often see from ECDEV groups, such as the groups that we're representing here today, that they, in an effort to achieve a sustainable community and economic development for their communities, you see these groups take these approaches, and you'll see why one works so much better than the other. The first approach is the standard approach. We'll call the standard approach. Second, the nation building approach. To highlight just the overview of what the standard approach looks like, you'd see, decision making as short-term and non-strategic. Persons and organizations other than the nation set the development agenda, going after grants and stuff like that without in a non-strategic fashion, where development is treated primarily as an economic problem. You also see Indigenous culture viewed as an obstacle, and elected leadership serving primarily as a distributor of resources. So in Snuneymuxw, the poverty that's prevalent is really amplified by us having the smallest land base per capita of all First Nations in Canada. So the calls for leadership to get something going is constant. This short-term thinking can allocate incredibly scarce resources to areas that may not have the best benefit for our community. So these types of knee-jerk reactions don't answer important questions that must be answered first, like what kind of community are we trying to build, and how do all these projects fit together? The federal funding that Snuneymuxw is dependent on for development gives the Canadian government a disproportionate amount of influence in the affairs of our economic development. So you'll see certain funding programs in Canada now, they're consciously trying to shed some of those paternalistic tendencies by shifting to block grant structures, but there's still I think, in my opinion, just far too much control imposed by federal government grants. Another focus of the standard approach is viewing development as primarily an economic problem. It's a common misconception that only if our land base here in Snuneymuxw was larger, or if our citizens were more educated, if we had more capital, more development would be underway. When taking this view, strategic goals and political issues are not taken into consideration. So to find success, nations need to clearly recognize what they are lacking and to develop strategic plans to rectify the situation. So for example, if you find your land base is too small, what steps are you taking to rectify that, and how will you measure success? And if you're finding that your community, your citizens are lacking in education, what are you doing to change that situation? Are you hiring non-members, or focusing on increasing graduation rates? And for the culture piece, which is sometimes seen as an obstacle, unfortunately, there's a misconception among many nations in BC that culture within governance institutions can be a hindrance, where in fact the opposite is true. So our institutions must find appropriate cultural match to even be considered legitimate to our citizens. So finally, in the standard approach, I talked about elected leadership serving primarily as the distributor of resources. So often in nations here in Canada, you'll see elected leaders control the resources of the nation. They make the hiring decisions. They sit on the boards of the economic development corporations. The stresses that are put on elected leadership to deliver on short-term goals can put them in just, I think, direct conflict with what the long-term needs of a nation are. So the difference in what can be good for a nation-owned corporation and what can be good for an elected chief and council can often be in direct contrast. So on the opposite side of that standard approach, we'll say that we'll move on to the nation building approach, which is a more progressive view. And I think, Angela and Trevor will see, and anyone else who deals with Indigenous economic development will see a lot of nations that kind of fit a little bit in both areas. But to summarize this nation building approach, first, nations need to assert their decision-making power by taking practical steps towards sovereignty and self-rule, not self-administration. I think there's an important distinction there, and taking decision-making powers into their own hands. Next, nations need to back up this control with effective governing institutions. Nations also need to create governing institutions that match their own political culture. And nations need to have a vision and strategic goals that will put in place systems and policies that will create their desired community and achieve their desired development goals. And finally, leaders of nations need to serve primarily as nation builders and mobilizers. So with a programmatic focus on institutional capacity building, economic development corporations and Indigenous governance institutions can truly begin making moves to self-rule rather than self-administration. So recognizing our own original and inherent sovereignty, Snuneymuxw is beginning to loosen the grip of colonial rule over our interests and taking accountability of our own actions, institutions, governance, and development. By creating these effective governing institutions, nations that are taking the nation building approach are making their own rules. By incorporating their culture into their governance structures, they create legitimacy, and by creating constitutions, bylaws, and other regulations, they can create stable environment for citizens and outsiders to invest in economic development. By following the nation building approach, Indigenous nations are able to build institutions that are stable, protect day-to-day business and program management from political interference, and are able to remove the politics out of dispute resolution processes, and are able to provide administration that can get things done reliably and effectively. So nations that taking the nation building approach also engage in strategic decision making. So these nations don't look at all the federal government grants that are available and apply for funds and see what they can build. They plan their development strategically with a clear vision and defined goals. At this point, it's then possible to take advantage of some of these grants that fit into our own vision of our communities, not someone who's crafted this funding pot in Ottawa. Finally, in the nation building approach, leaders serve primarily as nation builders and mobilizers. In these nations, leaders move away from the role of distributor of resources and begin to empower the nation as a whole through the development of strong institutional and strategic foundations. In the nation building approach, the nation's leaders aren't limited to elected officials either. You find them in your teachers and your nurses and your administrators and private business owners. So what can Snuneymuxw and other nations do? Have a vision, have strategic goals, missions, visions. They're all absolutely critical to economic success. Some of the questions our leadership ask ourselves include, where are we now? Where do we want to be next year, in the next 3 years, in the next 5 years, in the next 25 years? What kind of community do we want to be? A common vision about the future of the community must be developed with strategies and actions, milestones and deliverables, tracking and evaluation. So linkages between goals and how they can be achieved through existing and proposed activities in the nations has to be considered. There must be a deep understanding of the scope, scale, and resources required to prioritize opportunities that achieve the highest value. There also needs to be informed consent. So informed consent on the use of nation land must be developed, including a comprehensive land use plan for growth, So by gathering as much information as possible and seeking the necessary assistance to make informed decisions will allow the nation to move towards its vision while maintaining its cultural integrity and legitimacy in the eyes of our citizens. There also needs to be a commitment to economic development. A commitment to economic development by chief and council and leadership in general is critical in nations finding economic success. There must be a willingness and a commitment to learning about development and understanding the economics of money. How you have to spend money to make money, an understanding of the management of political bodies and an encouragement of private sector development, and clear policies on acceptable businesses on nation-owned land. I also wanted to talk a little bit today about one of our exciting developments here in Nanaimo. It's the Courtyard by Marriott Hotel downtown, right behind the conference center here. And at the beginning of last year, Snuneymuxw, through PDG and our partners at PEG Companies, broke ground on a 172-room Courtyard by Marriott Hotel in downtown Nanaimo. So the hotel stands in the traditional Snuneymuxw area called Skookumate, and the Hulkaminam name translates to litter of puppies, and was home to our domestic wool dogs called Skoomate. These white and brown wool dogs, which are now extinct, were highly cherished by our peoples. Their wool was spun on spindle whorls to create textiles such as nobility blankets, among other things. And this hotel gives Snuneymuxw the opportunity to share this part of our history, to honor the wool dogs in the land that they originated. The hotel also stands in the area where in 1854, Snuneymuxw leadership negotiated a treaty with the colonial government. The Treaty of 1854 recognizes the Snuneymuxw way of life, entitled to Snuneymuxw villages and other defined regions. So to me, it seems fitting that some 170 years later, Snuneymuxw Capital has brought this project to life. This hotel wouldn't exist without us. It's not only going to provide a major boon to the regional economy here in Nanaimo, but to our own Snuneymuxw economy. It's going to create career opportunities for our people, income for our government, and an opportunity to further advance economic reconciliation. So the career opportunities available to our people and to Greater Nanaimo represent an opportunity to build a life here in Snuneymuxw, which is, one of our main focuses here at PDG. Finally, I wanted to mention this little tidbit too for Indigenous active folks that are, putting these deals together, these investments together with your partners. This is one little thing that we included in our investment for the hotel that I thought was pretty creative. So as part of our subscription agreement with PEG, we not only negotiated royalties on certain items that are going to be paid directly to the nation. We're still going to have the economic benefit of being owners through PDG, but we also negotiated an assistant general manager position, which will be hired from our membership and world-renowned hotel management training. So we'll have a member that we select kind of fast-tracked into a management role with this hotel, and getting some pretty amazing training along the way, with the intent of that person running the hotel in the not too distant future. So that's what I have for you today, and I'll pass it over to Trevor to finish it off here.
Thanks, Ian. Great to be here today. Hello, delegates. Welcome to the summit. Great to be a part of this panel and hear Ian and hear Angela speak about what's going on in their nations in economic development. Uklama hiakse huayetha. My name is Trevor Cootes. I'm an elected member of the Executive Council for the Huu-ay-aht First Nations. I'm serving my second 4-year term with Huu-ay-aht, and I've held the economic development portfolio for 6 years now. I'll give you a little update or a little background on Houayt on our governance side, as well as our group of businesses, things that we're working on within our group of businesses, how that relates to our decision making. Decision making is a really key thing. It's something that Houayt identified in the 90s as being very important to our community success, is we needed to have the ability to make decisions for ourselves, being driven by Houayt community and our leaders, especially our Hatwea, our Snuneymuxw, which is our elders. In the 90s, we undertook the treaty process, and treaty process primarily to make sure that for generations to come, we can be driving our community needs by Houayt and not by the federal government. That was an important work that we had done doing that work. And in 2011, we signed our treaty, signatories to the Monmouth Treaty with 4 other Nuu-chah-nulth nations, which gave us the decision-making power to move forward and make decisions for ourselves as a community within our governance and within our businesses. There's 4 main components to Houayt's governance, 4 main decision-making bodies that contribute to our overall governance and decisions on where Houayt goes. So the one that I'm elected to is the Executive Council, as I mentioned. When you're a member of the Executive Council, you're also a member of the legislature. The legislature is really important. The legislature is where we make our decisions, where we pass our budgets, where we enact our laws, where we pass our Economic Development Act. So critical because that means Houayt over our treaty settlement lands, over our area, over our Tai Hutwith Cletion, which is our hereditary chief, Derek Peters, have the ability to enact laws and make decisions over that territory. And so that's really important for Houayt in achieving our high goal there. Another component to our governance system is the Hatwea Council. Hatwea is our hereditary system. Something that I'm very grateful for is Houayt, since time immemorial, has been guided by our sacred principles. Our sacred principles is Isak, respect, U'aflak, taking care of our lands, our waters, our peoples, but not only for now, but taking what we've learned in the generations before us and the stories and teachings our elders have passed on to it and how we apply that for generations to come. Last one is Hishuk Sawak. Hishuk Ma Sawak is everything is connected, everything is one. So important in Houayt. We can't make an economic decision without considering all the impacts that has on the overall Houayt community. Same thing in governance and laws that we do. All these things, we consider everything together. That's critical for Houayt because those are the teachings that we've had from generations previous. A 4th component to our governance system is the People's Assembly. So often you can hear in communities that you may be around, there's band councils and band meetings. When we signed our treaty, we implemented a piece of governance called the People's Assembly. So we are legislated to have an annual People's Assembly each year. It's pretty much a point where our governance system comes together and we provide reports on audits and financial statements on what we've been doing in our governance and in our businesses. But it's also an opportunity for citizens to participate in decision making. They have the ability to add to agendas. They have the ability to be a part of the decision making process when we're working on large decisions. So in Houayt territory, anything over $1 million needs the approval of the People's Assembly. Anything over 10 acres also provides us, we need to go to our people for their input and make a decision on those. So those 4 components give the good governance that Houayt needs in order to move forward and meet our strategic goals that we have in place for our land, our community, and our citizens. And with that being said, I'll move into what our structure is. So as I mentioned, I sit on council, I chair our holdings board. Our holdings board is the way that a lot of Indigenous communities now regionally here on the island, but across Canada are starting to undertake. And is that idea about separating politics from business. Understanding that it helps us libel-wise, it helps us take away the negative effects that a bad business can do on business, but on our political side. But more importantly, it starts to focus on the economy that each of our Indigenous communities want to have. And so I chair our holdings board that looks after 7 limited partnerships that we've incorporated since we've signed treaty in 2011. We have HFN Forestry LP, Hospitality LP, Fisheries LP, Gravel LP, Lands LP, Management LP, and another one called Market LP, and that's a LP that's focused on a general store and a restaurant that we had bought in Banfield. There's a little background on Hout. We're on the west coast of Vancouver Island. We're a small community. We have just under 900 citizens altogether, and we only have about 130 to 150 citizens that actually live in our territory, or more specifically live in Anakla. Anakla is very close to the west coast, a couple kilometers away from Banfield. It's a small village that's located within our territory. They also are a very small village of about 300 people altogether. And so moving forward, we have these 7 limited partnerships, and they're all guided by our economic development plan. Our economic development plan for Hout is something that we bring through our legislation, bring through our decision-making process, where we have all those pieces of governance that I spoke to involved in the process. So as the chair of the Economic Development Committee and the one that holds the economic development portfolio on an annual basis, we bring through this process of creating a document where our economic development officer has the pen to paper and creates this economic development plan, and then brings it through this process of having everybody involved, leading up to a spring legislature where we have our decision where it's passed by legislature. The important part there is what we focus on. There's opportunities for us, but we want to stay focused. We want to have priorities so that you can focus on those priorities and slowly chip away at building those economies that you want to have so that you can be self-reliant, generating revenue, job opportunities, and cash back for the nation to meet its community needs or its governance needs. So for Hout, we focus on the 5 priorities right now within the economic development plan. Those 5 priorities are forestry, fisheries, and tourism. Those 3 are important because those are sectors that are already been a part of the Hout community for some decades now. In forestry, it's Hout's bread and butter. It's something that in a lot of areas on Vancouver Island, that forestry plays a very significant role in our communities. They generate revenue, profit, job opportunities for our citizens. And even though that there's been struggles in forestry for some time now over the last few decades, it's still a huge contributor to Hout's economic economy. It's our economic driver right now. And for forestry is a very prime example of what you can do under a treaty tool. For Hout, our leadership, I've heard sometimes that treaty is almost an economic tool for us to be able to create the environment, the economic environment for our prosperity to happen. And the way that we've been able to do it in forestry is we don't just depend on forestry revenue with forest companies that are already existing or operating in our territory. What we've done through our treaty is we were able to successfully gain about 10,000 hectares of treaty settlement land that's under ours. So in BC, you have licenses, TFL 44, and then you have other licenses on the island and in BC. Each of those licenses have stumpage. You pay that stumpage to the province. In Hout, on treaty settlement lands, our forestry business pays that stumpage to ourselves. That is huge benefit when we look at our resources in the land and the water, and specifically our timber. We want to generate business opportunities and economic opportunities that will give back to our nation. And the way we've been able to do that is through different means. So we have our forestry business itself. Our forestry business has about 150,000 cubic meters per year that we have. And the ones that are the TSL, when we harvest and we have cut blocks that go out for that, the stumpage, instead of being paid to the province, we pay to our government. So in essence, Houayet has created the ability to generate multiple revenue streams off our forestry. That's greatly benefited us because now we're truly utilizing our timber resource. But in saying that, I had mentioned that the hereditary system plays a part in our governance. Something that is absolutely important for Houayet forestry is that we not only follow forest practices, best forest practices in BC, we exceed those with our own forest principles that have been put in place by our Hatwaya, our traditional leaders. That is great for Houayet because that means that we have the ability and at the same time meet our ability to have resources there for our citizens for generations to come. So our economic focus, our community focus is not just on now, but on generations to come. And we've been able to achieve that through forestry, through the number of initiatives that we have done. One is treaty formation of our business enterprises and how we generate revenue off that. Fisheries is another example. We have a fisheries LP that has a mandate to participate in the fisheries economy. We have a focus on making sure that we have resources there for generations to come. So we put millions of dollars back into our watershed renewal, making sure that that watershed renewal doesn't get impacted by our economic activities like in forestry and fisheries. And one of the ways that Houayet has looked at participating in the fisheries sector is the ability to partner. So we've partnered with 4 other nations in getting an acquisition into St. James Cannery. It was one of the last running canneries in BC 6 years ago. That's a great example of how nations can partner together in economic opportunities. Now, a favorite one for mine is tourism. If you've been out to the West Coast, you've probably been out to Tofino before, and you know Tofino is within Pacific Rim National Park. Pacific Rim National Park has the 3 units. There's the Long Beach unit where Tofino and Ucluelet are located, Barkley Sound where the Broken Group Islands are, and then if you go a little bit south, that's where the West Coast Trail is. On the north end of the West Coast Trail, that's where Houayet Territory is. So Houayet Territory goes from Suziet Falls, which is on the West Coast Trail, up to Cape Beale, and then inland through Barkley Sound, up the inlet to Colbin Creek. Tourism for us is a huge piece right now. We were successful in working with MER on a submission to the Treasury Board to have our road upgraded and chip sealed. So important for Houayet is we want to make sure that we have safe conditions for people driving, for our citizens and people driving into our territory. And so that's been a great step in securing an infrastructure project that has a focus on safety. But for me at the ECDEB portfolio, it's great because our hugest barrier to us creating a strong Houayet economy and being self-reliant in the near future was that road. If you've been out, I know people on the island here can be very familiar with Pachina Bay Campground. It's a campground that Houayet runs. It's one that's been running now for 50 years. And that's actually where I got my start in Houayet was when I was going to university, was working as an office clerk at the Pachina Bay Campground. It's a beautiful 2-kilometer sandy beach that looks out to the Pacific Ocean. With that road coming in now, you know, Houayet having a treaty has an immense opportunity to participate in the tourism economy, and more specifically in the market that Pacific Rim National Park offers, which is quite significant. And I often tell our leadership that, you know, the resource-based areas are important, but even tourism is just as important as those 2 economies. I often reflect that Tofino generates over $300 million a year in tourism business activities, and Houayet is looking forward to participating in that, driving that in our territory and how we can participate in that economy. But we're also looking at diversifying our economy. You know, we're looking at clean energy. We're looking at other areas that we can participate in. I'm really happy to hear, you know, the other 2 participants here speaking about partnership, because I think we know in Houayet that partnerships and joint ventures are so important. You know, for generations, for speaking long term, you're always going to be working with other businesses, whether they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous. And for Hurley, that's going to be an important piece for us. We did it with St. James. There's other ones that we're working on right now where we're looking at partnering with people to help us achieve our strategic goals, but also contribute back to the regional and national economy. I think that's so important. And I'll come back to that in a second. Our fifth one is supporting entrepreneurship. So important. Often we talk in forestry about, what are the opportunities with Indigenous peoples? And I think it's huge. When you think about the world market right now and how, people can be living in BC one day and living somewhere else in the world another, it can be very common. But I think here locally on the Vancouver Island economy, Indigenous peoples like to travel, definitely, especially the younger ones now more than others. But there's opportunity now for local businesses to work with Indigenous peoples. We're the fastest growing population, and so there's huge opportunity there. Just in conclusion, what I'd like to say is there's over 40 First Nation communities on Vancouver Island, and I guarantee everybody has whatever municipality or town you're from, you have a neighboring nation. I think the more that First Nations partner with small communities, the more successful we'll be. And I actually think it's paramount for the economic recovery for First Nations to be a part of the narrative, to be at the table, and that's an opportunity for small communities and for the Vancouver Island economy. So I'll leave it at there and thank everybody here for allowing Hurley and myself to participate in this session. I'd like to congratulate Angela and Ian for all their work that they're doing in the nations. It was great to see what they're doing, especially what Ian's doing in Nanaimo with the Marriott. It's great to see. So back to you, Dan.
Well, thank you very much, Trevor. Thank you also to Ian and Angela. Really great outline of the work that you're all doing in your nations to not only generate economic activity, but also to generate excitement for everyone. And so there's some really great points that all of you raised. We just have a few minutes before we turn it over to our audience. And again, to remind you, if you have a question or comment for our speakers, to please put that into the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll have a few minutes to go over those questions. But I do have a question, and maybe I'll start with you, Angela, so you have a chance to reflect on it. Because we heard a little bit from Trevor and from Ian about some specific examples of what's happening in the communities. But I'd like to hear from all of you, but I'll start with you, Angela, just in terms of a real success story when you're thinking about the pieces around building trust and generating economic activity. What can you think of an example that you can share where you've seen that work successfully, and perhaps tell us what were the pieces that were able to contribute to its success?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to refer to a very recent project that is the Malahat Skywalk project. So for those of you who aren't aware, it's a tourism project and just a really incredible viewpoint tower, for want of a better word. There's really no way to describe it if you haven't been, but on Malahat lands, essentially, it's just this incredible wood-based structure. And so what was positive about that was a partnership that was about 2 to 3 years in the making just for the partnership on its own. So it was about really building a genuine relationship, as I referred to in my discussion, with the partners who brought that to the table. They didn't come and tell us anything. They asked questions, right? And so that's what it's about. It's about asking, what's your vision? And maybe there's a way to fit in. Then it's about collaboration and being part of those discussions, whether it's about culture or community or economic plans and growth. What's your strategy? How do we make this work? It came down to a number of things that were around culture, art, education, the communications and engagement with the community, and ultimately leading to a large-scale role in both the arts and culture of the visionary piece that you see there, as well as jobs and management there of the Malahat Skywalk. So that's a really recent example of where I've seen it.
And Ian, for you, you've spoken about the Marriott project for Nanaimo, which is very exciting. Tell us a little bit. You told us a little bit about some of the unique features of that partnership. But where do you think that example of economic development is poised for success?
Oh, I think there's so many facets to that one. We're really excited about being able to diversify away from our reliance on forestry. Trevor mentioned that their bread and butter is forestry. It's the same for us. That's what our economy has been built on the last 6 or 7 years here in Snuneymuxw. Basically all the capital that we've had to invest in other areas has come from our forestry. So to be able to make the substantial investment in downtown Nanaimo, I think is an incredible thing for our nation, but for the regional economy here too. The amount of real career opportunities that are going to be available to our membership and to other people from Nanaimo is a big thing. And we have these hotels are pretty big operations, as you might imagine. It's not just the front desk people that you see in the restaurant and all that. You have your GMs and your AGMs and your sales staff and your admin staff, and having people trained up to take on those roles is going to be an exciting thing for the future and allow us to grow our capacity in tourism and hospitality management. We do run a campground here in the territory as well at Sasatchin, Newcastle Island. So there's a lot of I think we could see a lot of benefits directly to that operation as well. To have to be pointing tourists that are coming to stay at the hotel and pointing them over to Sasatchin and experiencing some of the cultural and adventure tourism products that we have over there. Yeah,
that's great. And Trevor, you walked us through. Gave us some really great detail around the Hout traditional governance structure and all the pieces around what makes good decision making for your nation. Where do you see this in terms of any element of your economic development portfolio where the fact that you are following this as all of you are, where this is really becoming an element of success not only for other First Nations, but also for the non-Indigenous community and non-Indigenous businesses?
Thanks, Dan. If you could just do the front part there for some reason, my speaker cut out on your first half of the question there.
Oh, I was just saying, you gave us a good outline of the Hout traditional both governance and your economic strategy. I'm just wondering where the fact that you've put so much focus on this, where you see real success coming and interest from, say, non-Indigenous business and economic partnerships.
Yeah, definitely. I think a prime example that I could share is around the work that we had done with Western Forest Products. The protocol agreement that we started with, I think, was a really good example that was spoken to by Ian and by Angela in regards to the conversations, the relationship building that happens at the beginning. It really sets the table for understanding Hout values or understanding Indigenous values, but also to be reciprocated. We understand that if we're going to work with small business or large business, that they have their own mandates, their own vision, and the great thing about agreements like that we had with Western was it really set the table for a good relationship. And it allowed us to take steps afterwards where we didn't have to go backwards. It allowed us to move forward, build on those successes, and allowed us to, I think it was last year. This pandemic's getting me a little fuzzy brain here, but at least a year ago, Hout had the ability to secure an agreement with Western Forest Products on Hout having a majority interest in TFL 44 LP. I think that was just great. That is, I think, great steps forward for Indigenous economic reconciliation. And I would say that would be my example there. Dan, I hope that helps.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Did Ian, Angela, anything you wanted add based on what you just heard?
Sure. That just made me think of the inception of this hotel project, and our work with our partners at PEG Companies. It's a group, real estate group based out of Utah, of all places. They had a deal with the Marriott to build a number of these Courtyard by Marriott hotels across Canada. They built the first one in Prince George. They had come to Nanaimo to build the second one, and one of their first stops was to come to see our chief and council, and the CEO of this president of this company came and with his senior management, and down our council chambers as we got to know them, and build some trust. And sometimes it's just those things you could pretty easily take for granted that really mean a lot, and planting the seed for a good relationship that we're going to be enjoying the fruits of very soon here.
And Angela, quickly, anything to add before we go to our Q&A?
Yeah, just finally, for non-Indigenous groups, again, just to that theme, always ask questions and invest in the time up front. And for Indigenous groups and communities, be choosy about who you do business with and make sure that their vision and values align with yours.
Well, thank you all. So at this time, we're going to go to our questions and answers. Looking forward to seeing them. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. We do have a few questions here I do want to ask, but I do just want to make a quick mention that Trevor Cootes was not able to join us. And sadly, there was a tragedy in his community in the past couple of days, and it has impacted him and it impacted everyone in the Hue community. And I do understand that there's also an impact with the Snuneymuxw nation as well. So we send our deepest condolences, especially during this very difficult time of grieving and loss for the community. We share that grief with you. So we do have some questions here that have come as a result of our conversation. So first one is, as business members from across the island communities, are there any specific actions that Summit delegates can do to help advance the Indigenous economy? So Angela or Ian, either one of you want to weigh in on that question?
I think it's about, and I bring it back to a theme. I sound a bit like a broken record, but it's asking questions. So at the start, who do you want to do business with? If you have a specific community, perhaps one, regionally that's local, adjacent to you, or if you find a specific interest, perhaps in forestry as an example, so that's how you target the nations that you may wish to do business with. It's about, pretending it's not COVID and showing up at the door. So it's about actually making some kind of gesture to engage in true communication and find out how they wish to best move forward as far as building some kind of discussion around what your interests are. So it's about not being afraid to just get out there and build a relationship as you would with anybody else.
Yeah.
I think Angela hit the nail on the head there. I think it's about relationships and taking the time to build relationships.
All right. Next question is, thank you for the presentation today. Very informative. We are an up and coming, partly 51% Indigenous owned company for general contracting. We are interested in nation building for any community on the island. What is the best way to do this? Obviously, relationship building, as you mentioned, is the undercurrent here. But any specific advice that you would give, maybe Ian, to start off with?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
So the question is, so there's a company here that's an Indigenous-owned company that does general contracting. What's the best way for them to make an introduction to, say, your company or to your corporation or to your community?
Yeah, like Angela said, I think on the last question, just come knock on my door. Send me an email, give me a phone call. I'm always looking for opportunities for my nation. I'm not too familiar with what specifically this company does, but just reach out.
Yeah, and I agree. And more specifically, I echo Ian and show up at the door. Come on in, introduce yourself. From there, follow up with an email, a call, a Zoom, whatever. And it's just about really connecting the dots. I personally will gravitate more towards somebody that I've actually seen in person, more than just somebody who continues to follow up by call or email. So that's okay as a start, but at some point, come and introduce yourself and it'll be more memorable and we can move forward from there.
All right, next comment. Congrats on all of the economic opportunities you're creating. How optimistic are you that these economic developments will also create the spin-off of increased mental health and overall wellness for the people in your communities? Angela?
I think, that question is very important. It touches on what true economic development means. And what I mean by that is there's a misconception that it comes down to revenue and profits earned. And that is just a piece of it, right? What it is actually about is that trickle down effect, what those profits and revenues allow you to do, which is incorporating it into the administration and providing resources for members of the community, which of course include resources around mental health and building capacity, whatever that means for your nation. Every nation is different. Every community has different needs. And economic development provides some sort of revenue stream to be able to be the engine to support those resources that the community requires. So in effect, the success of the economic development activities and plans will trickle down into true involvement and change and improvement in those other areas that are socially, that are more on the social side.
Yeah, I see, what we do here at PDG is, one pillar of that stands up our nation here, and the importance of the work to generate revenue and income for our government and for our membership is important, and the job opportunities, career opportunities that we're able to provide from our group of companies is important, and giving young people hope and a future of the potential of having real careers here within our territory is critical. But the mental health piece and the other socioeconomic pieces I think are better handled through people smarter than myself that are deep in that work. And I stop at being happy enough to be able to provide some source of income for Snuneymuxw's government to be able to provide those resources to membership, and then being able to provide those job opportunities and career opportunities.
Great, thank you. So there's a question here related to the donut economic framework that was discussed earlier, and I'm not sure if you had a chance to listen in on our session today with Carlotta Sands, but and of course there's another concurrent session going on at the same time. But it's the idea of an approach towards how do there's a mutual benefit within communities that's balanced with the needs of the population, the needs of the local environment, and basically creating a balance between economic prosperity and social and environmental sustainability. So I guess the question would be, how is this similar or different from the approach you're taking with each of your economic strategies? Ian, do you want to comment on that?
Sorry, I'm not familiar with the donut economy. I didn't see that that session. I've heard. Sorry, could you?
Yeah, so I did probably a fairly pedantic explanation of what it means, but it's a theory that's being used by larger communities to ensure that the cities and other urban centers are balanced, meeting the needs of its population, both with respect to food, with respect to housing, with respect to job opportunities, fair wages, living wage, that sort of thing. There's a balance with the environment, the local environment and nature. I mean, I think there is, I mean, my view is I think there is a lot of similarities from that general philosophy with the approach that each of you are taking towards economic development. So if you want to comment on that, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's it's interesting. I have to look into that a little bit. I know that the sustainability of every venture that we get into is of critical importance to us and to our chief and council and to our entire nation. We are in the business of resource extraction through our forestry business, but we try and I believe we do a pretty good job of looking at how our harvesting impacts our privately managed forest lands and the way that we've shifted our harvesting here at PDG and MBFLP is away from that clear cutting approach and looking at more sustainable ways of our forestry practices and that sort of thing.
Great. All right. Angela,
Dan,
quickly.
Yeah, I can add to that as well. I think the major difference, because I do come from a background in an urban corporate environment, and I think the major difference is it comes down to that importance of the revenue and the profits versus in Indigenous business, you'll see community and lands at the very top, and then beneath that, everything else trickles out. So it might bring us a lot of money, but if it's not respectful of the community, the people, and the lands, and doesn't provide sustainability there, then it's not something that we're willing to look at.
That's great. All right, I know there's a few more questions that have been sent to me, but we are going to move on to the roundtable portion now. This is your opportunity to ask questions or comment directly with our speakers. We've got over 100 people with us today, so that's a big round. That's a very big roundtable, which is only really possible on Zoom, I guess. But there's now a message in the chat. You can now turn your cameras on. You can also speak. It might be easiest, just so that we don't have 100 people speaking at once, that you put up your, you use the button at the bottom of your screen under reactions. And under reactions, there's a large button there that says raise hand. If you could raise your hand, if you have a comment or you have a question for our panelists, that would be easiest for me to be able to moderate the discussion. You also can use the chat. I'll keep an eye on that. If you prefer not to be seen or heard, you can use the chat as well. So I believe we've got about 30 minutes or more for this portion of the conversation. Obviously, if the conversation continues, by all means. And given the fact that we're not in person, this is one of the few opportunities we get a chance to actually see and hear from each other. So, all right. So I see a hand up already. Christopher Thiparaja, who's with Economic Development Canada, and is also our new member of our board of directors for VIA. Hi, Christopher. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much, guys, for the presentation today. And Dan, just to correct you, it's Export Development Canada. So,
yep.
Commonly made. Question to the panel with respect to what Trevor was mentioning earlier and the strategic partnership with Western Forest Products and TFL 44. Are there any such partnerships or strategic alliances within the aquaculture sector? Namely, we have some big players up in Northern Ireland like Moe, Grieg, and Cermak. Just curious if that's something that's being looked at or worked on. Thank you.
So in Malahat specifically, currently just has involvement in the fishery sector on a government level. So we're doing a lot of monitoring for environmental change and things like that with regards to the fisheries in our region, but no private business that we're working on currently.
Yeah, pretty much the same for us. I mean, there's nothing that I could comment on publicly right now. Anyways, I know that there are other examples of that throughout Canada, but not with Snuneymuxw.
Great, thank you.
All right, we have a question here from Sasha. Sasha, go ahead.
Thanks, Dan. So I have a question about using data to support economic development. We work mostly with municipalities and regional districts throughout the province. But recently we also joined Advanced Business Match, which is the business network of Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities and suppliers. So we would like to hear more about what kind of challenges do the Indigenous communities face when it comes to using data to support economic development. Like, is it the data collection, data availability, or a meaningful way to present that data to stakeholders and so on, or something else?
Yeah, I can speak to that just briefly. I think for me, it's more about the fact that there's no one hub for the purpose of Indigenous economic development per se, or even economic development in general, that you really have to find data scattered in a number of areas to piece it together for your use. So that would be probably my personal first challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to that, and Angela touched on this earlier, but the socioeconomic importance of the work that we do is so critical in having the data to kind of see what kind of incremental benefits our work is providing is certainly a challenge that where that kind of current data often doesn't exist to track that progress.
Thanks.
You know, just thinking about that, another initiative that's making a lot of headway is the Indigenomics Institute. That's another, and again, Caroline Hilton, who was one of our speakers last year, is doing some terrific work with the nations, but organizations all over Canada and the world. And so that's another thing, another activity you may want to look at, another source of material. All right, this is coming from the chat. Is there a need to increase the high-tech or fiber infrastructure for Indigenous communities in our region? And is this an opportunity for a business partnership?
Yes. So we're working on two major projects right now, a 55-acre business park and an 85-acre film studio, and both are greenfield projects. And, you know, I'm relatively new to Malahat. I'm about 4.5 months in. However, have heard that it's been 3 years in the making, these discussions as far as getting the infrastructure in place for communications, among other things. While those conversations are moving now, yes, it's needed 100%. Absolutely. I mean, if we're not developing there, somebody's going to be. So it's really about how do we speed up these conversations around the infrastructure. So yes, that's a huge need for us right now.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's certainly a need. I think being you know, an urban nation as we are in Snuneymuxw, it's a lot less pressing. You know, versus nations that are, you know, a lot more remote, that are relying on less, not the greatest technology to access, you know, the internet, but it's still critical.
All right, thank you. So we have a hand up from Tim Lowe. Tim, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone, and great presentations. Great to see all the innovative things that are happening in some First Nations on Vancouver Island. Right now, I'm doing some work with Public Services and Procurement Canada, working in the procurement assistance group. And right now, there's a request for supply arrangement for wrecked and abandoned hazardous vessels along the coastlines of Canada. And I thought this would be of particular interest to First Nations and Indigenous businesses and others on Vancouver Island. And I'm just wondering, are you aware of this request for supply arrangement that's posted on our our buy and sell website. And is there any further information you might like from us?
You cut out there a bit, but did you catch the question, Ian and Angela?
I think so. You know, I'm not aware, but yeah, I did. I wasn't aware of that that request, but if there was any part of that question I missed, feel free to repeat.
And I'm also not aware of that.
Okay. Well, it's an opportunity for First Nations businesses to clean up and recycle wrecked and abandoned hazardous vessels, boats and whatnot under 50 feet along the coastlines and river systems. So number one, I wanted to know if you're aware of it. Number two, is this something that might interest you and your businesses, your companies, and your communities? And I would be happy to point you towards the opportunity so you can have a closer look at it.
Maybe you could just, is there a way, Dan, to provide a contact information so that we can just reach out separately if it's of interest?
Yeah, there is. I mean, you can message directly through the chat here, or you can also through the CVent platform. Everyone that's on here is connected to it. You can message each other directly that way, and that way you're not giving all your personal details out. But yeah, there's a couple of different ways you can reach out.
Okay, sure, Tim. If you want to just leave your email, then we can connect on this afterwards. Sure.
Okay. The information is also available on our buyandsell.gc.ca website. So that's available there, but I'd be happy to follow up. I'll leave my email address in the chat or however that process works here. Thanks.
All right. So we've got a hand up from Apex Advanced Contracting.
Hi there. I have another question, more of a comment really. We identified another opportunity for potential communities, First Nations on the West Coast, on the west side of the island. We identified a major need for staff accommodations. And so what we're trying to do, we've gone into the second phase of our market research. The first one was the primary, which we actually went to 10 resorts on the island, and we asked them, you know, do you require, before we could even finish our sentence, they said yes. So they're currently going through a lot of staff turnover because a lot of the staff just don't have a place to live. So we have an idea. We're getting some help right now through NEDC, but right now we're trying to approach some of the local communities, looking at some of the land that's surrounding there. I realize there's a lot of steps involved, and NEDC is a great help, but there is a potential there for business partnership for First Nation or non-First Nation. So again, just like Tim, is there any way that we can connect somehow through this? If there's any possibility, let me know. Thanks.
Great. Sorry, I missed where the opportunity is.
So the opportunity is to create some sort of a village, a camp style village for staff workers. So those resorts, 10 resorts between Yuki to Fino in that area, there is approximately 100 staff that are homeless. They're living in their vehicles. And this time of year, it gets chilly. So a lot of them are quitting. They're just saying, I can't do this anymore. And so a lot of the resorts are understaffed. And this could also lead to, you know, who knows, addressing homelessness on a larger scale. But we're looking at kind of pod style trailers where could be environment friendly. We have kind of like an idea, a vision of how a First Nation could be involved in this as well. But we just need that connection. We need that network happening because we're just a new up and coming Indigenous company that we just really need to get our brand out there. So any help would be greatly appreciated.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a great great solution for the problem they're having on the West Coast there. For PDG, we focus our investments within our own Snuneymuxw traditional territory. But I think Trevor would probably, be a good person to try and connect with.
Great. Anything to add, Angela?
We've done some similar exploration in that area, actually, where we were approached by a modular construction company, and they wanted to essentially build something within Malahat territory for their own construction workers to build the big hospital project that's going on for the next 2 years. And then once that's finished, the partnership with the idea would entail them leaving the structure there for our use for social housing of some kind or whatever we wish, to be honest with you. So it's not new. And I think, yeah, I'd be happy to share more information with you directly after the talk if you wish.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for the question. There is a question here in the chat, and then we'll go back to live questions. So we have a fourth-year student from Royal Roads University completing a BA in International Hotel Management. The question is, do you think if there is any economic perspective related to sustainability? So just assuming sustainability, we're talking about environmental sustainability. If not, let me know. But that I'm assuming that from the question. I mean, I'll just go ahead, Angela.
Yeah, it just comes back to the theme that we started on, which is with Indigenous business in particular. One thing I've recognized is the lands and the community come first. Without the lands and the community, you won't have much of a business. So absolutely, the environmental sustainability plays a massive role in our decision-making process and how we're going to move forward with our economic development strategy. So absolutely, it's a huge part of it in Indigenous business.
Just to echo what Angela said, I think I could give a few examples of investments that PDG has made over the last few years that have sacrificed profit for the benefit of our members of our nation and the environment.
And one related initiative that I know VAIA is involved with, but also with First Nations, is in the seaweed industry. So there's a Pacific Seaweed Growers Association now, and obviously we have lots of seaweed on the coast here, but it's an environmentally renewable and sustainable industry that has lots of great benefits. So there's a number of different initiatives in that regard that are worth looking into. So thanks for the question. Chris, I saw your hand up earlier. Do you want to?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sure, Dan. Thanks. Just one quick question. Technology is a big thing nowadays, and when I say technology, thinking gaming and SaaS-based companies and whatnot. Just wondering from the nations, either from the nation itself or the entrepreneurs within your communities, do you see a lot of investment in technology, and what are their pain points and roadblocks to scaling it and growing that?
What I'm seeing actually is, so we certainly in the Malahat community, we don't have a lot of movement in technology interest from our youth or in any major degree. What I have noticed is that I've been asked to be part of a lot of initiatives that the government is putting on as far as how to get more Indigenous involved in the technology industry. I think Vancouver Island has its own strategy as far as attracting talent in technology. And it seems that from what I've seen, the provincial government is interested in garnering interest from Indigenous communities as well. So I'm very happy to take part in those talks, as I am, to help contribute to how I think that change can happen. But I do think that it will be an entire shift that'll probably take about 5 to 10 years to actually see.
Ian, anything?
Great thing.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I think Angela touched on it there. It's like to use Snuneymuxw as an example. Like I can't think of anyone off the top of my head that has gone down that career path. Not to say that there might be a few down there. And that wouldn't preclude PDG from looking at investment in that area, but it hasn't happened yet.
Great, thank you.
All right, another question from chat. Do you foresee a growing demand for seafood production post-pandemic? Is this a viable business partnership opportunity? Sort of related to what you mentioned earlier, but specific to seafood. Do you see it growing after COVID?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's, it's moving forward. It'll be as important as ever anyways, that seafood production here on the coast. And something PDG is going to be a lot more involved in the next 3 to 5 years for sure.
Yeah, and nothing more to add in that regard. I think the demand has always been increasing. And so I don't necessarily see a surge after COVID, but certainly in general, we need to come up with more sustainable methods to ensure the long-term sustainability of fisheries in general.
All right, thanks. David McCallum, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thanks, Dan. I just wanted to say thank you both for your talk. Has been good this morning, and also I'm sad to hear that Trevor isn't able to be here. But I wanted to follow up on Christopher's first question with regards to aquaculture, and I think that ties into this last question. One, I have a long distance background in the shellfish farming industry. I used to work for the Shellfish Growers Association, so I just wanted to comment that I am aware, Trevor would way better answer this question, but I am aware that the Hout have some involvement with oyster farming out in Barkley Sound. So I just leave that for Christopher to, you asked about fish farming. I can't comment on that, but I can comment on the shellfish farming industry and that they do, and other First Nations, of course, around Vancouver Island also have involvement in the oyster farming industry. That's just a comment, but my question, I suppose I could talk to Ian about this offline. I'm really curious to hear more about the wool dog story that you mentioned and how that's going to tie into the Courtyard by Marriott Hotel. That sounds cool and interesting. Maybe just if you could, Ian, comment a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, the plan for us right now is to kind of weave that story into the guest experience at the hotel through the art that'll be displayed from the lobby to the guest rooms in the hallways and in the elevators. And there's a bit of a plan being formulated by some of our community artists here to tell that story. And I think it's really cool. So thanks for mentioning that, and definitely would be open to discussing that more if you wanted to hear a little bit more about that, and about any your aquaculture experience too, because I think that's something that we're looking to move towards in a much bigger way.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, good luck with it, and I look forward to connecting with you in person. For sure.
All right. So next question from the chat: how can organizations like VAIA and other economic development agencies, whether that's ICE-T, chambers, municipal economic development agencies, how can they better support First Nations in moving towards economic reconciliation? And are there any examples from your nation that are working well, or relationships that are working well?
I think it's about drawing in the nations for their input. What I'm seeing is a bit of a movement by non-Indigenous groups and associations who are intending to move forwards on a path of reconciliation, but not necessarily understanding how to do it, or simply being driven by consultants on what to do. We really have to foster a relationship building environment, and it's about bringing in First Nations to be part of that discussion and developing your reconciliation plan.
Ian?
Yeah, thank you. I think a good example would be this year and by putting 3 heads of Indigenous Active Corps in front of these 100 or so island business people, and I think there's potential for for business to even spur out of these interactions here. I guess in addition to that, I mean, I know George Hansen, he's contacted me, regularly with opportunities that are that he sees that are coming down the pipe, because he's in touch with a lot of people. So when there's something that he thinks is a potential fit or a potential relationship to be developed, he's quick to get a hold of me and make that connection.
That's great. And just on the flip side of that, are there any specific barriers or things that are impeding further economic prosperity that need to be addressed?
I think perhaps the style of communication. As I said, I know personally, and in our department, we prefer face-to-face whenever possible, at least for an initial meeting. And what sort of deters us is when we're contacted electronically without any relationship, and as I touched on, even in some cases sent agreements and that. So, but I don't believe anyone means to offend anyone or is trying to cut corners. I think there's a real difference in the way we communicate in Indigenous business versus in the corporate world that does need to be addressed, and it is a culture shift, and we need to acknowledge it and adapt.
Ian, you agree with that?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd add is just the human resources that are available, oftentimes from Indigenous organizations like PDG or from our government at Snuneymuxw. They don't always line up with the human resources that are on the other side of the relationship. Sometimes we're dealing with the federal government or the provincial government, or these massive corporations that have the ability to throw lots of people and dollars at projects, and we're operating oftentimes on a much smaller scale.
Dan, if I can just add one thing, there is a resource that I don't know how many non-Indigenous groups know about, called the Comprehensive Community Plan, which is something that a lot of Indigenous communities or in collaboration with their economic development entities will work on together. And it's an incredible resource to learn about that particular community's goals, needs, their vision, their landscape. And it would be an excellent thing to do, to just as homework before you do step into their office to meet them, to just learn a bit more about them. And it's an incredible resource that maybe people aren't aware of. It's often available on their public website.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for that recommendation. Very helpful. The next question: as sustainable development strategies evolve, how do you see participation in adding value to resources? Now, when we talk about resources, this is just for the person who asked it, resources as in natural resources, or as in resources in information or human resources? Maybe you can clarify that for us if you could. In the meantime, do either of you want to comment? Human and natural resources, there we go. So I'll read the question again. As sustainable development strategies evolve, how do you see participation in what sectors in adding value to human and natural resources?
Go ahead, Ian.
I'm not sure I'm following that question.
Arnie, are you able to, if I pronounce your name correctly, are you able to clarify your question? Do you want to just put your mic on? Okay, I'm not hearing from you. So I do have a hand up here. I'm going to go to, and maybe we'll come back to that question if we have time. Andrea, go ahead, please.
Hi, thanks everyone. Thank you, Angela and Ian, for today's presentation and all the questions. I work at the Port Theatre on Snuneymuxw First Nation, and just wanted to get your thoughts and feelings on arts and culture and how it relates to economy, because that's a challenge that I think both Indigenous and non-Indigenous businesses face is trying to help people understand the value of arts and culture, and that it's not, again, not just about the money, but it's about the experience and the connection and sharing those special moments together.
Oh, sorry, the question, Andrea?
So the question is just how you see arts and culture like integrating into economic plans and ideas, like how, like the value of arts and culture in a from an economic perspective.
Yeah, from an economic perspective, yeah, it's very, very important. I think you know, the developing further, you know, Nanaimo's art culture is only going to do tremendous things for, you know, for our downtown core, which I think is, you know, important to anyone from Nanaimo. But, you know, for us, you know, us in particular, we're going to have a hotel, you know, stone's throw away from where you guys are, right? So you know, being able to share what Nanaimo has to offer culturally is very important.
Yeah, and I would add that arts and culture play a massive role in all of our economic development projects. Our intention is that any one of these that you visit, whether it's a business park or a marina or a restaurant or a hotel, film studio, you're going to know that you're within the traditional territory of the Malahat Nation. So it's not just something that you need to incorporate to honor the community. Rather, it's actually a huge value add. I think using the Marriott as an example, and Ian, I haven't seen your particular site, but I know I did some research on hotels for another nation. And what we recognized was that people didn't want, whether you're looking at mid-scale or high-end, what people didn't want was just the branding of the hotel. What they wanted was to feel where they are, feel that culture, see it in the wood enhancements or the art that's been done by community members and that. So it's a huge value add that we at Malahat anyway incorporate into every economic development project that we do.
Great, thank you. Great question. I see, Arnie, are you online? Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. So I'm coming from, I'm a recovering sustainability academic. I also work for Council for Federation of Canadian Municipalities and on the Port Authority Board. And my question is really about, you know, how we need to get to the next step from a First Nations perspective, really, you know, training for First Nations members. Also, adding value to wood products. We are really heroes of wood and water, movers of water, and we, you know, there's a huge economic opportunity there. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on where you see in your particular nation where you think you might be able to go.
I can speak just to your first point with regards to creating opportunities and where that can start and where can it go. As I mentioned in my talk briefly, a lot of companies come to us for a partnership and they offer jobs. The issue is deeper than that. It's not that there aren't current job opportunities. It's an entire social movement that needs to occur where these opportunities are presented to individuals and Indigenous individuals from a very young age so that they create an entire mindset around where their lives can go and that's within their control. Secondary to that come the training opportunities. That's where these partnerships will first peer in, where we have some type of educational component that we can offer as a resource to those members who are interested in ABC industry, whatever that is. And then from there, they'll naturally take on those job opportunities. And so it's really a culture shift. And again, it will take time. I do think you're going to see great change in that area over the next decade, but it's an investment into these communities that starts with the youth.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think, you know, taking what you said, Arnie, about adding value to wood products, you know, we're still a few steps away from that. Over the last few years, really, we've just been trying to build capacity in our own small forestry company to, you know, we're not even doing our own harvesting. That's all contracted out. We are, I think there is a lot of opportunity to look towards that in the future, and we have explored some projects to develop products using wood waste and that sort of thing, like hog and bark from trees, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Great, thank you both. Yeah, it really is about a culture shift. Thanks.
Okay, a couple more questions. We have about 10 more minutes before we wrap it up. Are there opportunities for private sector, locally based environmental and oceanographic companies to contribute to Indigenous-led scientific studies that would support capacity building? I hear the importance of involving youth, in brackets, sustainable harvesting practices, resource management, and responsible development of ocean-based industries. So there is a lot in that question, but where do you see the opportunities for private sector, locally based involvement in those sectors?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about building capacity in those areas. So a lot of Indigenous groups may not have that capacity internally. They may not have an environmental department. They may not have that. So it's about coming in the door, introducing yourself to us, telling us what you do. The Indigenous groups have access to a lot of funding that covers this type of work. So it is needed, absolutely. So it's about building those relationships, getting in the door, and figuring out where you can help fill those gaps. One recommendation I have is, as far as a partnership would go, wouldn't that it just be that the private company do all the work. It would be really about over time a knowledge transfer and truly building capacity within that nation. Maybe you start with 5 members of your team and 1 of the Indigenous nation, and then growing over time over the first 5 years to 5 and 5 and so on. Having some kind of exit strategy as well could work. So, that's up to each of you to decide. But the point is it's not just about coming in and filling a gap. It's about filling that gap and transferring the knowledge so that they can essentially fulfill it themselves over time.
I won't add anything.
All right, thank you. Maybe this will be our one of our last questions before we wrap up. What are each of you thinking in terms of the next 12 to 18 months? What do you think is an exciting or really inspirational activity or project that you're contemplating and is getting you motivated over the short to medium term?
Spoken about the hotel a bit, so I can give another example. One of the really exciting projects that we're working on here in Nanaimo is on Stewart Avenue, right beside the Departure Bay Ferry Terminal. We bought property at 1840 Stewart Avenue. It's the old Sealand Market site for anyone who's familiar with Nanaimo. It's been basically close to abandoned, very neglected site for decades now, we're really excited to be reinvigorating that site and doing some major renovations that we've already started to chip away at. Where for a big portion of the work, we're going to require building permits and development permits, which will take a few months. But in the pretty near term, we're going to see that site change dramatically for the better, and really see one of Nanaimo's prime real estate, waterfront real estate properties really transform from being neglected for decades now to something I think that everyone will see as pretty special for Nanaimo.
Great.
And for us, we're working on 2 major projects. The first being the business park, that's the main priority, but the most exciting being the film studio, which is just behind that. It's on a relatively similar timeline, so certainly within 12 to 18 months, you'll see movement on that. the film studio, we're building 3 sound stages, and the intention is for it to be a one-stop shop for the film and TV industry. So whether it's production or post-production, housing, materials, everything, you will not need to leave. And as such, we're actually developing a village or a town to support that. So the expectation is that it'll create about 2,500 permanent full-time jobs, another 500 part-time jobs, and that's just for the sound studios alone. So it's going to have a major economic impact in this region. Also of note is that the intention is for it to be 100% Indigenous owned, not just by Malahat, but we're right now just gathering interest in it being Vancouver Island Indigenous owned as a first step to see if we can get that accomplished. If not, we'll go into BC and then we'll go into all of Canada, but we're quite confident that we can pull it off. So it's exciting for a lot of reasons, but for some reason people want to hear about that one and not the business part. I don't know.
I'll have to talk to you about that one, Angela. That's pretty cool.
Definitely.
Yeah, and just kind of anecdotally, at that Sealand Market site, the largest building there right now is in really rough shape, but it is being used as by a film studio. They built a semi-permanent set inside, and they use a lot of it for storage and stuff. And I mean, to be frank, they must be really desperate because of the state of the building. Like you can be inside and you can see the sky from like the roof is that bad, and when it rains, it's literally their stuff's getting wet, and it's definitely not ideal for them. So the need is certainly there for what you're going after there.
Terrific. One last question before we wrap it up, and this has to do with procurement. Aside from the projects or partnerships you've described, are you seeing a real change or conscious decision making on the part of, say, governments or other organizations about pursuing Indigenous owned and led businesses to contribute to the Indigenous economy? And do you see this contributing to economic reconciliation going forward?
Yes, absolutely, to both. If I can first, just before I forget, I saw it pop up. Somebody wanted to know the name of that plan. It's the Comprehensive Community Plan. That's the name of that document, that resource. Okay, so absolutely. There's a movement in reconciliation right now in Canada, certainly evident in the opportunities available through, say, example, grant funding opportunities, partnership opportunities. We were recently pursued to actually go after a grant that specifically was for municipal and Indigenous community partnerships. So there's a movement going on right now, and it absolutely does respond to reconciliation, specifically the calls to action. There's a specific number of items on business development and business partnerships. So 100%, that's really supported right now on a municipal, provincial, and federal level.
Yeah, Angela answered that great.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Some great questions here, potentially some business opportunities and some activity going on. So let's keep the conversation going. Very much appreciate both of our speakers, Angela and Ian, and also to Trevor as well. We think of him today, both to his community, but also the wonderful work that's going on out there. Our speakers are going to get a gift from Island Good. It'll be coming to you shortly, so please enjoy that. And I also want to thank Ice-T, our sponsor for this session, and for their support. So our next set of concurrent sessions start at 1:15. So a good chance to grab a lunch, but also don't forget to visit our showcase and some networking opportunities as well during the break. So we will see you soon, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.